Ethan, a former Navy SEAL, lives alone in a wooden cabin with his loyal K9, Bear. But during a brutal winter storm, Bear vanishes, triggering the same crushing PTSD that once stole Ethan's best friend in combat. For 2 days he searches, terrified he's been abandoned again. On the third day, Bear returns, soaked, trembling, and carrying a dying wolf pup in his jaws, a tiny creature curled in pain, fighting for life. Ethan now faces an impossible choice: save the pup and break the law, or turn away and let nature take it. What follows is a miracle you won't forget. Stay until the end. This story will restore your faith. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from, and if this story touches you, please subscribe. The storm pressed against the Rocky Mountain cabin like a living beast, breath cold enough to turn the world white. Inside that lonely wooden refuge lived Ethan Hale, a 43-year-old former Navy SEAL whose presence carried both the solidity of a cliff face and the quiet ache of a man carved by grief. He stood 6'2", broad-shouldered with the powerful frame of someone who once lived on discipline instead of comfort. His hair, black, touched with iron gray, was cropped short in a military cut, and a neatly kept stubble sharpened his already rugged jawline. His skin bore the deep bronze of years under foreign suns, and his eyes, a pale steel blue, held the kind of watchfulness that belonged to men who had survived what others could not. Ethan's personality had become reserved over the years. He spoke few words, trusted even fewer people, and carried an invisible weight across his shoulders, the weight of a mistake he replayed every night. His teammate and closest friend Mark had died during a mission gone bad, a mission Ethan believed he could have saved if he had made a different call. That moment had shaped his days, his habits, even the way he breathed. Guilt had become his shadow. His only companion now was Bear, a 6-year-old German Shepherd K9 with thick sable fur, sharp amber eyes, and the disciplined gait of a trained combat dog. Bear was powerful but gentle, fiercely loyal, and attuned to Ethan's emotions in a way that seemed almost human. Where Ethan's voice was quiet, Bear's presence filled the silence. Where Ethan's past wounded him, Bear remained the one reminder of a world where duty and love still held meaning. Outside, the wind screamed across the pines. Snow whirled in blinding spirals, the kind of storm that made even predators hide and old men pray. Ethan stood near the window, watching the sky fracture into sheets of white. Bear paced restlessly, ears twitching, nose lifting as if he sensed something that hadn't yet touched the human world. "Easy, boy," Ethan murmured, though tension crept through his voice. He rested a scarred hand on Bear's neck. Nothing out there worth dying for tonight. But the storm had a way of calling to old souls and old instincts. A sudden gust rattled the walls. Bear stiffened. Then, without warning, he bolted for the door, barking sharply, a sound Ethan rarely heard from him. Before Ethan could grab his coat, Bear shoved the latch with practiced strength and plunged into the writhing curtain of snow. "Bear!" Ethan's shout was swallowed instantly by the wind. He grabbed a flashlight and ran out after him, the air knifing into his lungs. The storm swallowed every direction at once, blurring earth and sky until Ethan felt like he was standing in the blank center of the world. For 2 days he searched, stumbling through drifts waist-deep, calling until his voice cracked, retracing what little tracks didn't disappear beneath the storm's fury. And all the while, memories of Mark kept rising. The muffled explosion, the frantic calls over the radio, the metallic taste of failure. Losing Bear would be losing the last piece of his old life, the last tether holding him to something human. By the second night, exhaustion crushed Ethan's bones. His muscles trembled. His fingers burned with cold. He returned to the cabin with the bitter knowledge that the storm had taken from him once more. But at the first pale smear of dawn on the third day, a faint scratching came at the door. Ethan froze. Then he lunged forward and threw it open. Bear stood there, swaying on his paws, his fur clumped with ice, breath ragged. Ethan dropped to his knees, pulling the dog into his arms. Relief hit him so hard his chest ached. "You made it, buddy. Thank God." Then he noticed Bear wasn't alone. Clutched gently in the dog's jaws was a small timber wolf pup. No more than a few months old, its snowy gray fur matted with blood. The pup's sides moved in tiny, stuttering breaths. Its eyes barely opened. A dark entry wound glistened near the shoulder. A bullet wound, clean and cruel. Ethan's breath stalled. Every instinct warred inside him. It was illegal to take a wild wolf into his home. Illegal to treat it. Illegal to keep it alive under his roof. Wild animals were to be left to the forest or surrendered to authorities. The law was unforgiving here, wolves especially. But then he looked at Bear, who had carried this fragile creature through a deadly storm, and he looked at the pup again, small, helpless, dying on his doorstep the same way Mark had once died under his hands. His throat tightened. "Damn it," he whispered, not sure whether the curse was meant for fate, the law, or himself. Duty to the world said let it go. Duty to his own broken soul said save it. Between the storm fading outside and the storm rising in his chest, Ethan carried the trembling pup inside, knowing that the moment he crossed that threshold there would be no turning back. Morning crept over the mountains in a muted wash of gray, the kind that softened the world without warming it. The storm had passed, but its ghost lingered in the snowdrifts piled against the cabin walls and in the brittle air that clung to the pines. Inside, Ethan Hale moved with the slow, deliberate precision of a man who had lived too long in the company of wounds, both old and newly discovered. His steel-blue eyes were shadowed from a night spent fighting exhaustion rather than sleep, and the gray-threaded black stubble along his jaw made him look simultaneously fierce and frayed. He kept glancing toward the small bundle wrapped in blankets near the stove, his expression tightening each time the little timber wolf pup whimpered. The pup, Echo, the name had come unbidden like a memory, lay curled on a thick wool shirt. Under the matted blood and dirt, its fur was a pale gray mottled with darker streaks. Echo's ribs rose and fell in uneven breaths, and the bullet wound near its shoulder oozed faintly despite the bandage Ethan had tied with the practiced hands of someone who had once held life and death in the same palm. The pup could not be more than a few months old, fragile in a way that contrasted starkly with the wild lineage etched in every hair. Bear, the 6-year-old German shepherd with the thick sable coat, lay beside Echo with protective tension in every line of his muscular frame. His amber eyes, usually calm and observant, flicked constantly from Ethan to the pup, as if silently urging Ethan to do more, to keep saving this small life he had dragged home through the storm. Ethan crouched beside them, his broad shoulders curving inward as he checked the bandages again. His breath fogged in the air, a reminder the cabin still hadn't fully warmed. "Hang in there, little one," he said quietly. His voice was low, roughened by years of shouting orders in foreign deserts and by long stretches spent not speaking at all. "You made it through the storm. Don't quit now." The memory of Mark's voice rose inside him, unexpected and sharp. When everything breaks, do something wild. That's how you stay alive. Mark had been the type who smiled even when the world was falling apart, a man with sun-browned skin and a laugh that could snap tension in half. Losing him had carved a hollow in Ethan's chest that had never filled. Saving Echo felt dangerously like trying to fill that hollow. Ethan ran a hand through his short, iron-tinged hair and exhaled. Naming the pup might have been foolish, a commitment he wasn't sure he had the right to make. The law didn't care about good intentions. A wounded wolf on private land was still a wolf, and helping it was still a crime. A crunch of footsteps outside jolted him upright. Bear's ears pricked. Ethan moved to the window, instincts sharp. A figure was trudging through the snow toward the porch, a woman bundled in a heavy parka dusted with frost. He relaxed slightly. Sarah Jennings. Sarah was in her late 60s. small and wiry with a crown of white hair always escaping from beneath her knit cap. Her brown eyes were sharp in the way mountain women's eyes often were, full of weathered kindness mixed with a no-nonsense practicality. She lived alone on the next ridge, tending chickens in a garden that somehow survived every winter. She was one of the few people Ethan tolerated, partly because she had never pushed him to talk about his past and partly because she carried her own ghosts with quiet dignity. Ethan opened the door before she knocked. "Morning, Sarah," he said, forcing neutrality into his voice. She stepped in, stamping snow off her boots. "You look like you wrestled the storm itself," she remarked, her voice crackling with warmth and worry. Then she paused, sniffed the air. "Smells like antiseptic. And blood." Ethan stiffened. "Had a rough night. Bear came home hurt." It wasn't entirely a lie, but Sarah's gaze sharpened. Her eyes landed on the faint smear of blood near the entryway, then at the scattered gear Ethan hadn't yet cleaned up. The field dressings, the torn shirt, the melted snow mixed with something darker. "What happened?" she asked, lowering her voice. Ethan hesitated, then said, "Something small. Wounded. Bear found it." Sarah's breath caught. "Ethan, you didn't bring in a wild animal, did you?" His silence answered for him. She glanced toward the closed bedroom door where Echo lay hidden, then back at Ethan, her face tense. "You can't keep it here. Not now." "Why?" Ethan asked, though dread was already building low in his chest. "Silas McGraw." The name fell like a stone. "He's been prowling around since dawn. Claims he wounded something last night, a thieving brute from the woods. He's looking for blood trails." Ethan's fingers curled slowly into fists. Silas McGraw was the kind of man who made others step aside when he walked through town. Tall, gaunt, with a hawk-sharp nose and cold gray eyes that never softened. A hunter by trade and a bully by temperament. His beard was a wiry mix of white and iron, and his long, sinewy limbs moved with predatory confidence. The worst part wasn't Silas himself. It was the badge his family connection afforded him. His son-in-law, Brody Kane, was the town's chief of police, a broad-shouldered enforcer who often confused authority with entitlement. Sarah continued, "Silas is furious. Says something stole from his traps again. You know how he gets when he feels crossed." Ethan's jaw flexed. The image of the bullet wound in Echo's shoulder flashed through his mind. Silas hadn't just wounded some nameless creature. He had tried to kill a pup not even old enough to hunt. "He can't find anything," Ethan said quietly. "I took care of the tracks." "You think that'll stop him?" Sarah's voice shook, her concern, genuine. "He'll search every cabin if he has to, and with Brody wearing that badge, he'll have an excuse." Bear growled softly from behind the door, sensing the tension. Sarah placed a gloved hand on Ethan's arm. "Listen to me. If you're helping something wounded, and I know you are, do it discreetly. Because if Silas sees so much as a tuft of fur, he'll drag Brody up here and claim you're harboring a threat." Ethan looked past her, toward the bedroom where Echo breathed unevenly. The weight of the law pressed on one side, the weight of his conscience on the other. Saving Echo had already crossed an invisible line. "I won't let Silas near him," Ethan said, voice low, resolved. Sarah studied him a long moment, then nodded. "Then be careful, Ethan. This mountain remembers the choices people make, and Silas never forgets a grudge." When she left, Ethan locked the door behind her and leaned his head against the wood, breathing slowly. He could hear the faint whimper of the pup inside and Bear shifting his weight, waiting for Ethan to decide the next step. Outside, the pale sun offered no warmth. Inside, a fragile life struggled for another hour. And somewhere on the ridge, the hunter who had spilled its blood was closing in. The morning air was brittle, sharp enough to sting the lungs, and the snow outside Ethan Hale's cabin still held the faint marks of a long, chaotic night. The world had gone quiet in that eerie way the mountains often fell silent before trouble. Inside, Ethan moved with guarded purpose, his tall, rugged frame casting long shadows across the wood-planked floor. His steel-blue eyes flicked to the back room where Echo lay bundled in blankets beside the stove. The timber wolf pup had slept fitfully, its small body trembling with fever and pain. Bear, the 6-year-old German shepherd with the thick sable coat and amber eyes, lay protectively pressed against the pup, refusing to leave its side. Ethan had changed Echo's bandage, noticing how the wound had swelled overnight, an angry red bloom beneath the fur. The pup whimpered softly but clung to life with a stubborn persistence. As Ethan rinsed blood from his hands at the kitchen basin, a sudden shift in Bear's posture warned him an instant before the knock came. Bear lifted his massive head, ears pricking, a low rumble shivering through his chest. Ethan froze. The knock wasn't gentle. It was the kind that carried authority dipped in arrogance. 3 sharp, forceful blows rattled the wooden door. Ethan's jaw clenched. Only one man in these mountains knocked like that. Silas McGraw. The thudding came again, louder this time. Ethan wiped his hands, quietly shutting the bedroom door where Echo lay hidden. His pulse steadied. Not from calm, but from the ingrained discipline of a man who had survived firefights and ambushes. He approached the door with the composed stride of someone trained to face danger head-on. When he pulled it open, the cold rushed in alongside the tall, gaunt figure of Silas. Silas McGraw, nearing 70, was built like a length of rusted wire, lean, sinewy, and permanently coiled with hostility. His long gray beard was tangled beneath a weather-worn coat lined with wolf fur, and his narrow gray eyes gleamed with predatory sharpness. Deep lines carved his face, the kind earned through years of hunting anything that dared cross his path. Silas carried the scent of gun oil, pine tar, and the faint metallic tang of blood. His gloved hand gripped a rifle, held with the familiarity of someone who trusted a weapon more than people. Ethan stood in the doorway, his broad shoulders filling the frame, his presence unyielding. "Silas," he said with the cool neutrality of a soldier accustomed to reading threats. "You're early." Silas sniffed the air, his lip curling when he caught a faint trace of antiseptic lingering in the cabin's warmth. "Early enough to catch the truth," he muttered. His voice was gravel rubbed against steel. "I followed blood through the snow. Whatever was bleeding came right through your damn yard." Ethan held his gaze, refusing to step aside. Storm carried all kinds of things through here. Storm didn't carry bullet holes. Silas stabbed the butt of his rifle into the porch snow. "I shot a thieving beast last night. Gray fur, young, fast. Should have dropped dead where it stood. I'm thinking it crawled into your place." Ethan's expression didn't so much as flicker. His strong jaw, dusted with gray-flecked stubble, remained set in impassive lines. Only his eyes shifted, just enough to measure the man standing before him. Silas leaned in slightly, his breath a curl of frost between them. "See, thing is, I know what wounded animals smell like. I know what men hide when they think they're doing something noble." Ethan's voice lowered. "If something ran through here, I didn't see it. That's all I've got for you." Silas's eyes thinned to slits. "You always were a bad liar, Hale." Bear, sitting stiffly behind Ethan, let out a deep growl that vibrated across the wooden porch. Silas's gaze snapped to the dog. "That mutt of yours is too damn smart for his own good." Ethan's patience tightened. "State your business and be on your way." Silas's grin was cold and thin. "My business is simple. If that animal comes limping around here, you hand it over. I don't care if it's breathing or not. Wolves bring trouble. Trouble I intend to put down." Ethan braced a hand against the edge of the door, subtly blocking Silas's attempt to peer past him into the cabin. His voice sharpened with steel. "Then you've got nothing to worry about. You've checked here. Now leave." A long, taut silence stretched between them. Silas's weathered face shifted, and suspicion curled like smoke behind his narrow eyes. He stepped back one pace, then another, as if retreating only to gain a clearer shot later. "This isn't over," he said softly. Too softly. "If I find out you're sheltering what's mine, not even your medals or your dead friend's memory will save you." Ethan stiffened at the mention of Mark, an intentional cut meant to draw blood. Silas saw the reaction and smirked before slinging the rifle across his shoulder. Without another word, he turned and trudged back into the snow, leaving a trail of deep prints heading toward the tree line. Ethan watched until the old hunter disappeared among the pines. Only then did he allow tension to slip from his shoulders. Bear nudged his leg, anxious but ready. Ethan glanced at the closed door behind him, where Echo lay fighting for each breath. The hunter was close now. Too close. And the next time Silas McGraw came knocking, he wouldn't come alone. The afternoon light dimmed behind a veil of low clouds, turning the mountains into gray shoulders hunched against the cold. Ethan Hale stood in the center of his cabin, every muscle drawn tight beneath his flannel shirt. His tall, broad-shouldered frame, hardened by military years, seemed carved from iron, but his steel-blue eyes betrayed the storm turning in his chest. Beneath the floorboards, hidden in the old supply cellar he once used to store military gear, the tiny Timberwolf pup, Echo, whimpered faintly. The sound was barely audible, but to Ethan it roared like a siren. He knelt beside the trap door, pressing his palm flat to the wood, silently begging the pup to stay quiet. Echo's breathing trembled beneath his hand. The pup was still feverish, still weak, its pale gray coat damp with sweat and its small body curled tight against the cold stone below. Bear stood beside Ethan with rigid alertness, the big German shepherd's thick sable fur bristling. His amber eyes flicked incessantly between Ethan and the front door. He sensed trouble long before the knock sounded. The first thud on the door was loud enough to make a nail vibrate loose from the wall. Ethan rose slowly, the shadows on his face hardening. He had known this moment was coming from the second Silas McGraw had walked away with suspicion poisoning his stare. A second knock followed, forceful, rhythmic, official. Bear growled, low and dark. "Stay," Ethan murmured. Bear obeyed, but his body remained coiled, ready. Ethan opened the door. Standing on the porch was Brody Kane, the town's chief of police and Silas's son-in-law. Brody was a big man, built like the trunk of a pine tree, with a barrel chest straining against his dark uniform jacket. His square jaw was clean-shaven but carried the heavy set of a man who lived on authority rather than kindness. He had short-cropped blonde hair, a ruddy complexion from years outdoors, and pale eyes that squinted with suspicion before they softened into something resembling polite professionalism. Brody wasn't inherently cruel, but he had a long history of letting Silas influence his decisions, an insecurity born from growing up in a small mountain town where lineage meant everything. "Afternoon, Hale," Brody said, adjusting the badge pinned to his chest. His breath curled out in a white plume. "We've had some reports of an injured animal roaming near your ridge. I'm required to inspect properties for public safety." Ethan leaned a shoulder against the doorframe, his rugged figure blocking the view inside. "You're here because Silas told you to be." Brody cleared his throat. "Silas said he tracked blood toward your land, just doing due diligence." "Due diligence," Ethan repeated, his voice cool. "Fine. Look around. You won't find what you're looking for." Brody stepped inside, not rudely but with the heavy tread of a man used to being obeyed. The warmth of the cabin washed over him, carrying faint scents of antiseptic and wood smoke. His pale eyes narrowed. "You patching someone up?" "Just myself," Ethan said. "Old scars get cranky in the cold." Brody grunted and moved deeper into the cabin. Ethan shadowed him, careful to angle his body between Brody and the rug covering the trap door. Bear followed like a sentinel, silent except for the steady rhythm of his breathing. Brody opened cabinets, checked behind the stove, scanned the floor for signs of paw prints. Ethan held himself still, forcing his pulse to slow, observing every micro-expression on Brody's square, sun-reddened face. Then, outside, a rustle broke the stillness. Ethan's breath hitched. Bear's ears shot up. Through the window, a shape emerged at the tree line, a full-grown wolf, broad-shouldered and fierce with a thick winter coat of silver and charcoal. Her golden eyes glowed like embers stoked by grief. Echo's mother. She prowled just beyond the fence, nose lifted, catching the scent that tied her to this cabin and the pup hidden beneath its floor. Her muscles quivered with instinct. She took a step closer. Ethan's heart climbed into his throat. If she howled, or if Echo gave a cry from below, everything would unravel in seconds. Brody paused mid-search, turning his head. "You hear something?" Ethan forced himself into motion, stepping between Brody and the window. "Wind picks up strange around here. The storm changed the acoustics." Brody frowned. "Sounded bigger than wind." Ethan shrugged, offering a neutral expression carved from years of combat control. "Mountain cats roam sometimes." Outside, the wolf bared her teeth but did not make a sound. Bear took 2 strides toward the door before Ethan snapped his fingers softly. Bear froze, muscles trembling with the effort to obey. Ethan met the big dog's amber gaze and gave a subtle hand signal. "Stay quiet. Protect, but do not provoke." Brody moved toward the window, curiosity sharpening his posture. "Mind if I take a look outside?" "Actually, I do," Ethan said, stepping closer. "Fresh snow. You'll mess the tracks I use to monitor predators." Brody hesitated. He wasn't brave enough to confront Ethan's steel-blue stare, nor foolish enough to dismiss the quiet authority of a man who had survived war. At last, he exhaled and stepped back. "Nothing here seems off," he admitted grudgingly, "but I need to file a report saying I checked the premises." "Write whatever makes your badge comfortable," Ethan said. Brody ignored the bite in the comment and headed for the door. As he stepped outside, the mother wolf vanished into the forest shadows, melting away like smoke. Brody scanned the tree line but saw nothing. "You're clear, Hale," he said. "I'll let Silas know I didn't find anything." "You do that." Ethan watched Brody march to his truck, watched the vehicle crunch down the snowy path, watched the red taillights disappear behind, the curve of the ridge. Only when silence claimed the mountains again did Ethan unlock the door and let out the breath he had been holding. Bear pressed his head against Ethan's hip. A soft, muffled whimper rose from the cellar. Echo was still alive. Outside, the forest exhaled, and the mother wolf retreated deeper into the trees, waiting. The morning sky was a pale wash of winter gold, thin sunlight filtering through the pines like weary lantern light. Ethan Hale stepped out of his cabin into the brittle cold, his breath curling in soft plumes as Bear trotted at his side. The big German shepherd, aging, broad-chested, and steady as bedrock, moved with practiced vigilance, his sable coat ruffling each time the wind whispered through the trees. Ethan's tall, rugged frame cut a sharp silhouette against the snow, his shoulders heavy beneath his worn flannel jacket, his steel-blue eyes alert. Days had passed since Brody's inspection, leaving both man and dog in a constant state of taut awareness. But in the midst of tension, something unexpected flourished. Echo, the small timber wolf pup, was healing. His once matted gray-silver coat had begun to shine, and though he was still thin, his pale green eyes carried a sharper brightness each morning. His gait remained unsteady, but Ethan could see strength collecting in his tiny muscles like a fire gathering beneath ash. Echo followed Bear relentlessly, his little paws pressing prints right inside the bigger tracks Bear left behind. Bear tolerated him with the reluctant patience of a seasoned warrior forced into mentorship. The shepherd would pause, nose lifted, and Echo would mimic him with earnest clumsiness. Ears pricked, tail stiff, breath fogging the air as he learned to read the silence of the forest. Ethan watched the unlikely pair with a quiet ache. There was tenderness in it, an echo of what Mark once said before a mission went wrong and cost him his life. "Teach what you know, Hale," even wild things learn loyalty. That memory shaped Ethan more than he admitted, and now, watching Bear guide the wolf pup, the old soldier felt the faintest pull of purpose, a feeling he thought his scars had buried long ago. Inside the cabin, Echo learned to recognize the sound of Ethan's footsteps, the smell of boiling broth, and the warmth of resting against Bear's flank at night. The pup began to nuzzle Ethan's hand when he approached, a gesture full of instinctive trust that always made Ethan pause, chest tightening around something fragile. But danger was never far. On the fourth morning, Bear's hackles rose before they even left the porch. Ethan followed the dog's gaze to the tree line, where a faint metallic gleam glinted beneath the snow. Ethan's jaw tightened. He knew that glint. He knew it too well. Steel traps, illegal, cruel, and freshly set. Silas McGraw. The old hunter's impatience had hardened into malice. Ethan crouched beside one of the traps, brushing snow away. The device was a heavy-jawed iron clamp, designed not only to hold an animal's leg but often to crush bone. His breath came slow, controlled, but rage simmered beneath it. Silas wasn't just hunting. He was sending a message. Bear sniffed the trap, tail stiff. Ethan grasped the cold iron and pried it up, the metal groaning as if protesting. He carried it to a nearby pine and hung it from a low branch. The wind clanged it softly, a warning bell for whoever dared to cross this line. As Ethan moved along the property edge, he found more. Too many. Each trap was set deliberately close to his land but not technically trespassing. Silas's signature way of hiding cruelty behind loopholes. Bear helped locate them with a sharp nose and sharp instincts. But as the morning wore on, the tension grew. Echo had followed them outside, his thin legs pushing through the snow. Ethan kept him close, but the pup darted between Bear's legs, curious and eager. When Bear stopped abruptly near a fallen log, Echo nearly collided into him. Ethan took one step forward and froze. Just 3 inches from Bear's front paw, under a thin dust of snow, lay another trap. Its serrated jaws waited like the mouth of a steel predator. "Easy," Ethan whispered, voice dropping to a low command. Bear held perfectly still, muscles locked. Ethan moved with slow precision, kneeling and brushing the snow away. The sight of the trap so close to Bear's leg carved a cold trench through Ethan's gut. Something hot and vicious surged up his spine, the kind of fury that once kept him alive in war but now threatened to spill over in this quiet mountain life. He disarmed the trap and lifted it with trembling hands. This one he hung high, higher than any of the others, so Silas would see it from a distance, unmistakable, undeniable. A declaration, not of violence but of boundaries Ethan would die to protect. He found 5 more traps that morning. By the time he returned to the cabin clearing, the pine trees at the border gleamed with iron jaws swaying in the wind, macabre ornaments marking a line Silas had crossed. Echo pressed against Bear's leg, startled by the ringing metal. Ethan crouched and touched the pup's head, his calloused hand sinking into soft fur. "He wants a war," Ethan said softly, eyes scanning the ridge. "But not here. Not with you two." Bear leaned into his side with a soft grunt. Echo licked Ethan's wrist. The gesture cracked something open inside him. Ethan stood tall, his breath curling white, his gaze hardening as he stared toward Silas's property. He was done hiding. Dawn rose like a pale breath over the northern ridge, the early light faint and cold, as if the sun itself feared disturbing the silence of the mountains. Ethan Hale stood on the rocky path with his coat pulled tight around his broad shoulders, the chill clinging to his skin like an old memory. The lines of his face, sharp jaw, faint stubble, eyes worn by years of conflict, looked more severe in the morning blue. At his side, Bear moved with dutiful purpose, the aging German shepherd's thick fur dusted with frost, amber eyes alert for danger. Echo padded behind them, his small timber wolf frame trembling with anticipation rather than weakness now. His once thin limbs had grown steadier, his young muscles coiled beneath a coat of silver gray that gleamed faintly even in the half-light. Each step brought a soft crunch of snow, and every few strides he tilted his head back to release a soft, breathy howl, the beginnings of a call that carried the wild in its marrow. Each night Echo had called to the forest, and each night the forest answered with faint, distant replies. Ethan knew the meaning. Wolves were near. Echo's kin were looking for him. And Ethan's heart, still cracked from Mark's death, still carrying old ghosts, understood that keeping the pup any longer would be its own cruelty. Wild things returned to the wild, even when it hurt. Ethan knelt, resting a calloused hand on Echo's head. "Today's the day, little guy." The pup leaned into the touch, his green eyes soft with instinctive trust. Bear nudged Echo's side with his muzzle, giving a low rumble of encouragement. Ethan exhaled, stabilizing his thoughts. He had chosen the North Pass, a narrow, rocky corridor bordered by high stone walls. It was remote, sheltered from the town, and wolves often traveled through it. But danger clung to the choice too. Silas McGraw knew the terrain better than anyone, a seasoned hunter with decades of mountain lore carved into his bones. Even so, Ethan hoped the early hour would protect them. They were halfway up the trail when Bear suddenly froze. The big dog's body stiffened, tail raised, ears thrust forward. Echo halted too, catching Bear's tension and pressing close to Ethan's leg. Ethan followed Bear's gaze. A shadow shifted near a cluster of boulders, silent, patient, wrong. Ethan's pulse thudded, a cold rush sliding down his spine. "Bear, stay close," he whispered, but it was too late. A man stepped from behind the rocks, boots crunching with deliberate force. Silas McGraw. He looked even more dangerous in daylight. Tall and raw-boned, his thick gray beard tangled like winter brush, his weather-beaten face creased from years of harsh seasons and harsher choices. His small, mean eyes locked onto Echo with an animal hunger. He wore a heavy hunting coat, stained and patched, and in his gloved hands he held a long-barreled hunting rifle, already raised, already aimed. "There it is," Silas growled, his voice coarse with triumph. "The little monster that's been bleeding my traps dry should have died the first time." Ethan stepped forward, placing himself between Silas and Echo. His voice came low, dangerous. "Put the gun down." Silas barked a laugh that ghosted into the freezing air. "You think you can order me? That wolf is a menace. I'm doing this valley a favor." He shifted his stance, the rifle's barrel aligning with Echo's small chest. Echo whimpered, pressing into Bear, who stood stiff as granite, ready to strike. "Silas," Ethan warned, steel-blue eyes narrowing, "this isn't self-defense. You're breaking the law. Those traps you set—" "Don't you dare lecture me about the law," Silas snapped, spit spraying the snow. "My son-in-law runs this town. You think anyone's going to arrest me? You think anyone will believe a broken soldier hiding mutts and monsters?" Ethan's jaw clenched. The word broken struck harder than a bullet. Memories surged. Mark's last breath, blood on desert sand, Ethan failing to pull him out of the blast zone. He steadied himself, voice low and shaking with fury. "Echo isn't your target. This is about control, and you're terrified of losing it." Silas's face twisted. "I'll put down anything that threatens my land." He pulled the triggers slack. Bear lunged. The shepherd's massive body slammed into Ethan and Echo, knocking both aside in a flurry of snow. The rifle thundered, echoing through the pass like a crack in the sky. A bullet tore a spray of rock from the cliff wall. Ethan rolled, pulling Echo to safety, heart shattering with the realization of how close it had been. Bear growled, a deep, furious sound that vibrated against Ethan's ribs. Silas chambered another round. But another voice cut through the chaos. "Enough!" A second figure strode into the pass from the ridge trail above, boots striking stone with unwavering authority. Brody Kane, chief of police, broad-shouldered and imposing in his dark uniform, held his service pistol leveled at Silas. His usually mild, pale eyes were hard as hammered steel. His breath puffed white, matching the tension boiling between them. "Silas," Brody said, voice cold as the mountain air, "drop the weapon." Silas's jaw slackened. "Boy, you don't point that at me. I'm your family." Brody stepped closer, gaze unflinching. "Family doesn't excuse bloodshed, and it sure as hell doesn't excuse illegal traps or firing at an unarmed man." Silas sputtered. "He's hiding a wolf. A damn wolf." Brody didn't blink. "And you're breaking the law. Again." Ethan held Echo close. Bear pressed protectively against them. Snow drifted through the tense silence. Brody's voice came firm, resolute. "Law is law, even for you." Silas stared between the gun, the wolf, and the man he thought he controlled. Then his shoulders sagged, fury collapsing into frustrated defeat. The rifle clattered to the ground. The mountain air settled into a fragile stillness once Silas was led away in restraints, the distant crunch of boots and the clink of metal fading down the ridge like a bad dream dissolving at dawn. Only the whisper of the pines remained, their tall silhouettes swaying gently in the soft wind that slid between the rocks. Ethan Hale stood motionless for a long moment, breath heavy in his chest. His tall frame, broad-shouldered and hardened by years of combat, seemed carved into the earth itself. The cold morning light brushed across his rugged face, catching the faint silver in his short dark hair and deepening the shadows beneath his tired blue eyes. Bear sat beside him, the German shepherd's thick coat dusted with snow, chest rising and falling in steady breaths after the confrontation. The old dog leaned slightly against Ethan's leg, offering his quiet, steadfast presence as he always had, from the battlefield to this frozen ridge. Echo stood a few feet ahead, the young timberwolf's posture drastically changed from the trembling pup Ethan had first held in his arms. Now his silver-gray coat gleamed beneath the cold sun, thicker and fuller, the pale green of his eyes sharp and alert. His stance was confident, wild, as though the mountains themselves had shaped him overnight. A low, distant howl drifted from the forest, deep, resonant, and unmistakably calling for him. Echo's ears pricked, his tail flicked once. Ethan swallowed hard. This was the moment he had known would come. He crouched down slowly, his knees creaking, his breath condensing into soft clouds. With careful fingers, he loosened the small harness Echo had been wearing for safety. The leather strap fell away, landing soundlessly in the snow. "You're free now," Ethan murmured, his deep voice edged with both pride and ache. Echo blinked at him, the wild intelligence in his gaze piercing deeper than words. Bear stepped forward, lowering his massive head to sniff Echo's muzzle. The pup butted his forehead gently into Bear's jaw, a final gesture of shared understanding. Ethan's chest tightened at the sight. The unlikely bond between them, war dog and wolf, felt like a quiet miracle carved by winter. Another howl echoed through the trees, followed by a second, higher-pitched one. Echo turned toward the sound. His body shifted, muscles tensing with instinct. Then he ran. Snow burst beneath his paws as he sprinted into the clearing, his movement fluid and fierce, no longer the frail creature Ethan had rescued. Ethan rose slowly, his breath caught in his throat as he watched Echo bound toward the line of evergreens. But just before disappearing into the shadows of the forest, Echo skidded to a stop. He turned his head. Their eyes met across the stretch of white. In that fleeting moment, Echo's gaze held layers: wildness, gratitude, recognition, and something Ethan hadn't expected, a faint, wordless farewell. A promise that the life Ethan saved would echo through the forest long after their paths diverged. Then Echo vanished into the trees, swallowed by the voice of his kin. Silence rushed in like a deep breath. Ethan stood rooted in place, the finality of the moment settling gently over him. It was not sorrow that filled him. It was release, a quiet untying of knots that had bound his heart since Mark died in his arms years ago. Bear nudged Ethan's hand with a soft whine. Ethan exhaled shakily and rested his palm on the dog's thick fur. "We did good, buddy," he whispered. "We did real good." They made their way back down the trail, each step lighter than the last. The sun rose higher, casting warm gold over the snow, melting thin sheets of frost from the pines. By the time they reached the cabin, the world felt subtly changed, as though the mountains themselves were easing into a softer season. Ethan lit a fire in the hearth, the flames crackling to life with gentle warmth. He sat in his old armchair, the leather worn but familiar, and Bear curled up beside the hearth, his dark fur glowing under the firelight. Ethan leaned back, closing his eyes as the tension bled out of his shoulders. The scent of burning pine filled the room, a quiet promise of safety and renewal. Outside, snow began to thaw in delicate rivulets, dripping from the eaves, pattering softly against the earth. Winter had lost its edge, giving way to the first shy notes of spring. Ethan felt the shift deep inside himself, too. The wound of losing Mark, sharp for so many years, had softened at last, stitched together by the act of saving Echo, by letting go, by choosing mercy over fear. In the humble glow of his cabin, with Bear's steady breathing filling the quiet, Ethan realized he was no longer haunted. The mountains no longer felt like a place to hide, but a place to heal. In the end, Echo's return to the wild was more than the closing of a chapter. It was a quiet reminder that life is full of small miracles, the kind that arrive in the midst of storms and lead us toward healing we never expected. Some people call it fate, others call it grace, but Ethan believed it was the gentle hand of God guiding broken hearts back into the light. And just like him, we all face moments when we must choose compassion over fear, mercy over anger, hope over despair. If this story touched something inside you, share it with someone who may need a sign today. Leave a comment, subscribe, and help these stories travel farther, because you never know whose life they might soften. May God watch over you and your loved ones, and may His quiet miracles find you in your hardest days.